Nom, 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 nom. One of the best buys I have had in a long freaking time. Hey, it's Chris. Yo, we're ball-rogging it up. We got the biggest and the best. My thoughts, reflections, and plays of February 2020 freaking 5. Played some good games this month. And this is going to be weird because even the lower games on this list were still pretty good. But that's why they're also lower too, because we got to talk about it. Sometimes fit, sometimes mechanics, sometimes something else. That X factor. When you know it, you know it. And crowdfunding. What was good and bad and thoughts now looking back on February as well from that aspect? You ready? Let's freaking go subscribe to the channel. You ready? Let's do this. Let's start with the crowdfunding though, and then my best of the played games. First up, I mean, we have to talk about CMON, right? When you raise a couple $1 million on crowdfunding, you're gonna get attention from me. And as I said in the you shouldn't back it, here's some stuff why, pros and cons, and maybe you should get it. I mean, Massive Darkness 2, Dungeons of Shadowreach. Now, again, I said this on my video there, where we were comparing it to just Massive Darkness 2, right? It reminded me very much of Cthulhu, Fear of the Unknown, or Cthulhu, whatever the third one is called, because I can't remember off the top of my head. Death May Die. And arguably, or potentially rather not as much arguably, that, you know, the second and third iterations of these games have been more well thought of. Marvel United, anyone? Potentially Nemesis, if it ever gets to us. And I look at this and I go, okay, this is going to be better. This is going to be more unique. They slightly skewed the numbers there a little bit in terms of a little bit more heroes, a little bit more roaming monsters, a little bit less bosses, which is fine because in the end, the roaming monsters, as everyone says, are the cool part, right? Those are the ones you're going to interact with the most. You're not going to be interacting a ton with the bosses, except for at the very end. And, you know, sometimes climactic, sometimes anticlimactic phrasing, Archer situation there. But that's sort of how they twisted it around, just like with the expansion stretch goal box here that you saw, you know, how CMON kind of did that. But the main thing, looking back, you know, on the surface value, I have to point out 3.8 million for 2 and 2.8 million for 2.5, whatever you want to call it. And again, like, is that game found effect where it's just not raising as much because of the casual passerby traffic that Kickstarter generates? I mean, don't get me wrong, game found, what, $167 million in 2024 raised. More features and more content crap coming out that you don't need on their pages all the time. And they're innovating, they're trying stuff, they're trying to entice people. And I don't know if it's going to be a Google, Q-tip, Kleenex sort of situation compared to Kickstarter, right? Where it's, you kickstart it, you Q-tip, Kleenex, you know, it's the expression that's used. And I don't think there's as much of that as there used to be. But you're still seeing this trend of some of the smaller projects really struggling to get traction. And I know it's more attractive from a publisher creator side of things. The fees are lower. The pages are easier to design. I understand that. But if it's raising $1 million less, how much less are those fees? Or how much is GameFound paying CMON to host their stuff over there? Because, you know, when you're raising that much money, you know, CMON is essentially saying, here's money that you're getting by us just being there. So the quid pro quo there is definitely something that I'd love to see details of that we never will. But again, I just go, okay, at the same time, is it gonna be something I need to get on crowdfunding? I don't know. The Darkbringer exclusive stuff was offered again. The best value by far and away with the Zombicides and the Massive Darknesses, and most of their stuff that's any of their main properties is on crowdfunding. And the sheer imbalance, as I saw with Zombicide White Death, of the core versus everything else, that it just kind of makes you feel a little high and dry at times. And so I've been looking at this, truth be told, picking up a retail copy with an expansion or two. But I also just don't feel like it. I don't feel like wondering what I'm missing, and I don't feel strongly enough about it, even though I feel like this is what I would want Zombicide to be, because Zombicide has never fulfilled me. And that's on me. I'm not blaming Zombicide here. Just be very, very, absolutely, utterly clear. But I think this is more appealing mechanically to what I would love to be able to do as a next level for my kids. But where is this going to go? Nowhere, honestly. It's going to stay on GameFound. But just like with Death May Die, just like Marvel United system, we've seen now 4 United systems. We've seen 3 Death May Dies. Now seen 3 Massive Darknesses. I mean, folks, if you're raising 3 million, 4 million, whatever it may be, and again, maybe this is the point I glossed over earlier, I'm not really saying that you really need to look into the money thing any deeper. I just think it's a fascinating topic of discussion in our hobby scene, because I've got people shouting at me in the comment section one way or the other about Kickstarter and GameFound all the time. But you need to remember, more money doesn't mean better, you know? And I think there's this fallacy, and there's this grass is greener of people looking at projects, artistry right now, as one of those, this is really pretty, or tiny epic dungeon adventures, you know, where people are getting in on it, and then other people are getting on it because other people got in on it. And then they're getting in on it because other people got in it, and they want to ride the hype wave. They want to ride and then they end up with games they don't like. And so then you see things that get more money than maybe they would have if people just, you know, stuck with what, okay, right? And so that's why ultimately I don't think it really matters, because, again, doesn't mean a better game. More money raised does not mean a better game, period. Bottom line, above all else. The other one on GameFound, again, my top one of the month when we talked about it at the beginning of February, Bullet freaking Cubed. Do I think you need a big box storage? No, I absolutely actually am mostly anti big box, because I believe truly that that is where a lot of games go to die. It's harder to get out. It's less accessible. Frankly speaking, again, even with the vast majority of the ones I have seen, they are less helpful in terms of actual get it out faster. And it's just making it overly complicated to store in some ways. Like, okay, you know, sometimes, you know, having 5 or 6 baggies is easier, and just dumping them out and opening them up, than having them all in their individual little trays and having to pull them out of their individual little trays, because those trays are actually only for storage. They're not actually for getting them on the table and, you know, ease of access. Or all of a sudden that thing that is actually supposed to be on the table takes up 3 times the amount of space that just having it in a little pile or in the baggie would. So I'm not as big a fan in that regard. But I own everything for Bullet. And I will own everything for Bullet. If you missed my 10 by 10 / 11 by 11 from earlier in this month, I said that that is going to be on my list. That's one of the ones I'm going to make my wife play cooperative with me, because she hates the competitive mode. And I stand by this, right? I stand by owning everything at some point. Again, if you're not getting the big box storage, you're probably better off waiting. If you really have that price concern issue on which crowdfunding and which small publishers are going to support side of things, wait for retail aspect from level 99, sure. But again, like, especially with crowdfunding nowadays, the huge, massive, utterly incentive, you know, whatever it may be, exclusive deluxifications, isn't nearly as big as it was 5 years ago. So it's more, which one of these small indie publishers do you feel like giving your support that wouldn't get, you know, it elsewhere? And you know what? Again, don't forget, you can crowdfund. You can just, you know what, say, I'm going to support them through their business, through the local game store, online or otherwise. Or, you know what, you can always go to their shop online too, at retail. All of those, do not forget. Do not let other people tell you. Do not listen to the hype. All of those are completely and utterly acceptable. It's also acceptable to say you have too much of a game as well. I have mixed feelings about this one, again, with Star Trek Ascendancy, right? Like, second biggest of the month. It's raising significantly, actually less than Massive Darkness at almost $3 million compared to 2.8 with Simon's glory ship there. And I just don't know what to make of this, right? I feel really, really, really conflicted when I saw the campaign go live and they had 3 GameFound crowdfunding exclusive factions. Part of me goes, you know, Chris, it's like all those expansions for United system that you were just talking about, right? who cares if a couple of them are exclusive? Because you already have so much other freaking stuff that it's not going to make a dent. The only thing it's going to make a dent in is your psyche, not your actual get it on the table aspect of things, right? At the same time, right, for factions that people wanted and for a game that is retail exclusive up until this point, I can turn the mic off because it doesn't really matter right now because I'm still not fixed in that sense. So that's a little bit of a slap in the face at the same time. You know, if you've been a huge retail supporter from that aspect to now have to back it on crowdfunding because you know that the price is going to be higher, you know it, than what the expansions would have cost at retail. And you're really paying or subsidizing the big box stuff, right? And again, we just talked about big boxes and games and dying and inaccessibility and too much of a great thing. And this encapsulates it as well in that regard. So not a whole lot different. Again, like I just said, though, which side of that coin in which publisher's pocket do you feel that that's okay? The only thing I will say about this as well is they said, look it, we bling this thing out already. There's no stretch goals. And I like the transparency, whether or not you like the practice of the no stretch goals, right? We are just not doing it. We're not baiting switching. We're not dangling the carrot aspect of things. This is what it is. These are the prices. Here you go, right from the get-go. That was the one thing I said really right when we talked about Primal the Awakening. People balked at that price when Reggie Games put it out. And they said, here's all the expansions. Here's the price. There you go. See you later. Here are the pledge levels. That's all we're going to give you. And as much as you might not like the cost of some of this, right? The deluxe all-in for this with all the miniatures blinged out, $500. The playable all in. Let's talk about that word for a second. It is motherfrickin' playable whether or not you have all this crap or not. So that is a marketing bullshnikey term. I hate manipulation like that, just like you see in restaurants when they try and upsell you on mashed frickin' potatoes, right? Oh, there's blah, 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 and the blah, blah. Right? That's just to make you feel like you're somehow accepting of paying, you know, like $10 for mashed potatoes as a side, as opposed to $2 anywhere else at any other restaurant with the exact same ingredients and recipe. So, I mean, that's fine because the next lower level from 400 is 250 and it has all of the original civilizations and all of the other stuff with some bling. So, you know, again, the triple expansion though was $150. Which, I mean, I guess is kind of okay-ish because you've got some of these expansions like the Borg Assimilation, which runs about $45 to $50. You got the Dominion War, which is about $50, but some of the individual actual factions are anywhere from like 15 to 30. So is it going to be more like some of the bigger expansions or is it more like the smaller expansions? Or is this just crowdfunding inflation as a whole? I don't know. And if you're FOMOing and you can't afford to risk it and wait and see, well, you went in on it. So let me know. You feel good about that one? And it's okay if you do. I'm not saying you judge me either way. I'm just curious to know people's opinions on this too, because all I got is mine up here right now. So there you go. Two other sides of the same coin. We had Terminus Frontier launch, and then we had Earth Under Siege Flashpoint relaunch over on GameFound with a reprint and expansions. And again, very similar vibes as a whole. Spacefaring, you know, upgradable, customizable, shoot 'em out, dungeon crawl-esque crawler in general, you know, whatever you want to call it. Yes, they're completely different in some of the mechanical aspects of things. Yes, the bullet system of Terminus is really cool. Yes, the stealth and the more, you know, strategic aspect of a Metal Gear Solid style Mass Effect vibe of Earth Under Siege is completely different. But I said this on both of them, you know, looking back at the beginning of the month. I said, I have no clue if a game like this nowadays on either of these sites is going to get $200,000 or $2 million, especially with Terminus Frontier, miniatures, crawl, right? Those are the keywords adjective-wise that you see things just blow up on crowdfunding. But which ones blow up and which ones don't sometimes? I have no idea. At the time of me filming this, Terminus Frontier is near the end of the campaign. They are teetering on $200,000. Earth Under Siege Flashpoint got nearly $300,000, but that's not a huge upgrade from their $200,000 campaign when they launched, and successfully funded the last time. Almost have as many backers this time, 1,200 to the 1,500 for the extra $100,000. So a lot more people in that sense potentially getting in for the new stuff, but not as many people getting in on the whole thing, even though this game was and has been relatively very, very well received. So quality, again, doesn't always pan out to money, as I was saying. And that's the other thing with Terminus, right? As we've seen with several of these, when Terminus comes back a second time, is it going to do a Madara? Absolutely blow up? Or is it going to do an Earth Under Siege Flashpoint when it comes back? Because it's going to come back, right? If you raise this much money and you have this much content and you want to put out more, because invariably they always have like 3 expansions, but sometimes they do hold back and thankfully not include all 3 in the first campaign, because you don't need all 3 to begin with. But again, just interesting. What blows up, what goes viral, and what doesn't. Not my channel, but games. Then let's go to the stuff played. And in case it's not clear, this is what we're talking about first. Metal freaking Gear Solid. I have mixed feelings. Rules and the explanations of how these bad guys sort of have priority and turn and maneuver is a little bit messy. However, it does do a great job of bringing this IP to life. And so if you have nostalgia for this IP, this is probably one of the best nostalgia-based IP games that's out there, especially from a video game side of things. Do I like it as much at higher player counts? Not really. I think 1, even 2 is going to be best. Do you want to link scenarios together? Do you want to do just the VR individual one-offs? Again, for what's in the box and the mechanics that they've incorporated, this is really freaking solid. And so I give Simon a lot of kudos with this one of, although it took forever and ever and freaking ever to get to us, it's a relatively freaking good game. But ultimately, I don't think it's going to be a great long-term fit for me. So that's why it's number 8. Like, I just don't want to go and play this one-off all the time, right? But if you want stuff that lines up with what you're remembering of Metal Gear Solid, the boss fights and the and dealing with reactions of enemies, it does a pretty good job of it. So relatively pleased from that aspect of things. Then number 7, actually right here sitting next to me, had the multi-game review out earlier this month, Survive the Island. I can hear all the pieces just falling out and making a mess in here. And again, this is a game where, you just heard it again, it's very chaotic. It's very take that. It's very King of the Hill. It's very go after your dad because he's your dad sort of game, right? When you've got people playing against you. And at the same time, it's just fun. It's just a nice, fun game. I have the expansion monster pack here too, which I think is nice, but I don't think it's like wowzers either. I was hoping for just more craziness with this one. It doesn't have enough craziness for me. Pterodactyls are cool with how far they can go. The whales are kind of meh. The krakens are kind of in the middle. And if, the piranhas are used, they're fine. But I also don't feel like I would say that you really need this to get a better experience. It's going to be slightly variety, but otherwise just this right here would be more than enough alone as well, because all you're doing on your turn is moving your survivors. And you can only move them so far if they're in this water, for example. And then you get to move the bad guys, and you can move them away from your guys or towards other people's. Whoever gets the most in one of the 4 corners, because each of your individual survivors each have a number of victory points hidden on the bottom, which when you're placing them down in the drafting style, then remove a tile island situation, because then you can dump people in the water or collect those tiles and use those abilities later to mitigate. Again, has those elements. It's better than the individual parts. The sum is what I mean. And so is it going to be a forever game? I don't know. The kids like it, but I don't know if it's going to stand the test of time forever and ever, amen. But for right now, it definitely has. And so that's why it's there. Then the other one hiding right under here, under a couple other games, is the upcoming Final Titan from the creators, the publishers actually, the publishers who brought you Agent Avenue, which I love, Mindbug, which I love, Richard Garfield, and Nerd Lab Games. I have mixed feelings. The potential for this is incredibly high. Not necessarily as high for me personally as maybe those other two games. Because, I mean, those two games are like easily Agent Avenue, probably top 40 or higher game. Mindbug, probably top 50, 60. And again, that's, out of about 1,000 games. So take that for what you will. That's really good, right? But the dynamic here is just completely different. And I'm not sure that the monsters themselves that you're playing as are as different as I would like. Their ultimate abilities are nice. Actually, you know what? I take that back. The upgrades aren't as crazy and all over the place as I was like. The characters are wide variety and have ultimate attacks that are different, but I just want to see ultimate upgrade craziness, total difference every single time, right? Like a Mindbug, where you just play it and every single game is so dynamically different. You don't see the same cards in the same order, in the same pattern, or even half of them in the same game when you play 2 or 3 in a row. And the dynamic of needing at least 3 players with this game, which is really kind of what it does, is that you have a champion sitting in the middle, sort of like a King of Tokyo, only unlike King of Tokyo, then you go around and you decide who wants to basically just move their monster into Tokyo with the equivalent version in this case. And then you go, and it's King of the Hill, and the last one with a monster standing after people do this, wins. The incentive and the driving factor of this is that, though, if you decide not to go in, you have to put an upgrade card out there for the eventual person who does go in, which helps them overcome their enemies, which, again, maybe takes out a monster that you can't take out because then you can't beat A with your B monster, but C can beat A, but then B can beat C, if that makes sense. And so that's the dynamic. And so I want to see what the final product looks like this as a draft battler, because you do some drafting in order to get them in the first place. Then I'm going to go splitsies on this one. I feel like the expansion would offer a whoa, but I'm actually relatively pleased with what Creature Caravan from Red Raven Games, as a review copy that they sent to me. I understand now why it was on a lot of people's top 10 lists for 2024. I'm very pleased with the tableau building. It's got sort of this Wayfarers of South Tigris vibe, if you're familiar with that game, because like in that game, you're having to traverse your pieces across the board to trigger, an end game situation. Maybe not really trigger the end game like Wayfarers, but it's part of the end game, I guess is what I'm saying. And how far you get across and the spaces in which you land on as you're not only moving row-wise, but column-wise as well on this grid-based map are going to be dynamically different. You're going to have negatives, and that's maybe the biggest conundrum, is that I just don't feel like the negatives for going into the negative spots are outweighed by the positives. Like it's almost an obvious choice. I just need to go through this and say screw it sometimes. And so I almost just wish that element wasn't in there. But the awesomeness of the tableau building with the huge deck of asymmetric cards that this comes with is awesomely frustrating, if you will, because it's so big and there are so many keywords that you're having to keep track of or potentially look for, that because it's so big, you may not ever get the other keywords that you are looking for, especially at lower player counts, because you're not going to cycle through as much of them in the first place. But how it does that unique tableau system is really cool. Landing on the bonus spots on that map as you're traversing across is very, very enjoyable. And like I said, Wanderers, I have mixed feelings about. It reminds me a little bit of a way of Cascadia landmarks, if you will, because I don't want the 5th and 6th player expansion that it adds, because I think I don't want to play this with more than 3 or 4 for sure. At the same time, it offers 45 more new creature cards, which are, right, along those lines of things that you're going to just have in part of your tableau management awesome engine build. And you can equip as an additional little action. And so it's not available yet at retail. So if you didn't get it on the crowdfunding, you can't get it at this point. And that would be my main thing, is, do I love this game enough to go after that, especially with a Splitsies expansion? knowing what it's offering in that regard. So there you go. So then number 4, right? Number 4 is, it's going to be a little bit of a hypocrite right here. Ticket to Ride, Legends of the West Legacy, right? I'm very critical of this game. I'll be having a review out shortly before or after this one, talking about my exact experience and thoughts with it. It was a review copy provided for me. That being said, I think it's a very, very solid game. At the same time, for the price per play, the price per comparatively to things similar, the price of admission in that regard, I have a hard time telling other people to do it out of their pocket in that regard, right? That is, you know, something I think is overlooked on my side of the camera way too often. When we're talking about zombie sides, when we're talking about whatever, this is a great game that you're not going to be able to afford, right? Or that costs 3 times as much as it should have. Foundations of Rome, anybody? Right? Great game. Don't buy it. Go get Metropolis instead. So that is the chip on my shoulder there, and I'll go into more detail on that in the review. So then number three right here. Again, I've cooled off on it a little bit, and that's why it's number 3. But you'll know why number 2 and number 1 are also beating it out in a second here. Number 3 is Compile main. And at this point, at the time of you watching this, there will be an announcement that Compile 2 is coming out from Greater Than Games. It's completely standalone. I think it's mixed matchable as well. The rulebook for this is not great. Not because it's not written well, because it reminds me of a few of the Button Shy or the Level 99 games like Exceed. I love them. Let me preface that before anyone else comes in saying anything else otherwise. But the problem with them is they don't address some of the nuances that these relate. Some of the nuances of the countering and the maneuvering and the changing of lanes of the cards is not fully explained. There is a reason the Board Game Geek forums are absolutely chock full of questions regarding edge cases, because they're not addressed in the rulebook. The rulebook is written to be thin and to fit in the box rather than actually explain the concepts in enough detail to take away any of the questions. It's still a great game for a lane control situation. You know, I understand why people love it. I love great games. This is a great game. I hate having to look up, guess, or feel like an idiot as the person teaching, because we're playing with a combination of things that hasn't come up before and is not answerable intuitively or off the surface. And this has some of that. And not a ton, not every game by any means, but it's enough to make me go, man, okay, still freaking good. And, you know, again, I'm not just saying that, right? Here's the expansion pack. So that's number 3. Number two. Again, number 2 sitting right here. Okay. Marvel freaking Dice Throne, right? My kids are absolutely in love with this. I, truth be told, am not in love with all of the characters. I'll probably do a separate review on this one as well. But I have mixed feelings about some of these characters. Not because they're not thematically incorporated. I think the thematic incorporation for a majority of these characters is very nice. I don't really know. I also don't really care as much about balance, right? I'm not a meta person. I'm a, is this character fun to play with person? Is this crazy enough, chaotic enough for me to love them? Right? So I've got a few in here that I absolutely can say yes to that with. But I've also played a couple that I'm just like, I don't really like this character. Which, when you're spending this much money on this, right? That's my big conundrum. That's my big stop sign, red flag for people if you're looking at asymmetric games. Because if you can't handle having a couple of these in here that you don't like, you shouldn't buy it in the first place. Because you're not going to know which ones that's going to be, just like a Root, just like a Summoner Wars, Just like a Marvel Champions lot that someone's selling en masse. Just saw that the other day. $750 worth of Marvel Champions. All completely unopened on a Board Game Geek auction. You want to talk about stuff that's wrong with our hobby? Right there. Anyway, side tangent. But, I mean, like, yeah, I'm not a big fan of Psylocke. I love her character. I was super excited to play her. She was the first one I attempted to play, and I do not like her character. I don't like it. Gambit's is gimmicky and cool, but it's also a little bit too difficult to consistently use. Wolverine seems underpowered, but he's also this little, fur ball of rage that steamrolls people at the same time. So, with him and Rogue right now, I like them. Cyclops is always the bridesmaid and never the bride. I'll leave it at that. If you're a Cyclops fan like I am, since being a kid in the original 97 show, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And so I like it. I like it a lot. My kids love it, which is why it's where it is. And missions, again, I have mixed feelings on. It's a little bit too fiddly, a little bit too long, but it's cooperative. And being able to play these with my kids cooperatively, can't say enough positive things about it at the same time. It counteracts some of that. Last up, number 1, Eternal Decks. Eternal Decks. Eternal Decks. The best cooperative game I've played in 2025. Perhaps even the best cooperative new game that I have played in 2024 or 2025. It's that good. I was a Kickstarter backer, and I love it. Portland Gaming Collective, if you want a copy of it, is putting out, I believe, selling some on their web shop, which may already be sold out because it went on sale prior to me, actually right prior to me filming this. But I think they're going to try and get more of it available maybe in the future as well with another crowdfunding campaign to get some more streamlined nature. This, I'll tell you right now. If you're not familiar with it, let me just give you a brief synopsis about what it is, because otherwise you're going, Chris, I've never even heard of this game. You're a freaking moron to be talking about it that good. This is in the line of like a Tranquility, the Game, the Mind situation where you have a limited deck of cards of a color. You all start out with a unique color, and you have constraints of rows that you need to build in terms of limitations of what cards can be placed where. And you just build that row. And when you finish building that row, then you get to grab one of the bad guy decks at the end of the row and incorporate that into your deck. Because if you can't ever play a card, you lose, and you only have 5 cards, or 7, depending on player counts-ish, either way, when you start out. And that's not very many when all of these rows are 4 cards each. So that is the dynamic that you're doing. But when you're laying these cards in these rows, not only are there specific restraints, like you can't lay one color next to the same color in any row at any time, asterisk, but you also run into this situation where each of the rows also has a unique modifier, unique rule restriction that makes it even tougher. And then as you're grabbing these decks to refill your own deck, they are enemy decks. So the top card on the enemy deck, it tells you what cards you're getting, what colors and what numbers as you're shuffling them up and putting them on the bottom of your deck, not knowing what order it's going to be as the main criticism. If you can't deal with that sort of thing in the first place or hate that randomness or luck that comes with that, is that they all come with curses, the enemies do, which then further constrain your ability to play cards in the first place. Oh, I need to have a row of 5 cards that are ascending from 1 to 9 going up on every single one without the colors touching that are the same? Oh, that doesn't seem that hard as we go around the table. However, now the 2 curse cards that are out there don't allow me to play 2, 5s, 7s, or 8s. Oh, that is a little bit tougher when you can't communicate with each other. And there are 6 different unique scenarios to start out with. There are 3 levels of difficulty for each scenario that you can adapt to, and you can just create your own and do it that way as well. So absolutely, pound for pound, one of the best buys I have had in a long freaking time. Is that good? So when you see my top 10 list of best games for, I don't know, should we do this by quarter? Beginning of April, because I was going to do it maybe just in July as the first half of 2025. But you know what? I might just do it by quarter, like Game Found Feast. Every quarter, we got to give you something good. We got to get you eating good. Nom, 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 nom. It's going to be an outtake at the beginning of the video. But why not, right? Because I believe in transparency. And there you go. That was February freaking fantastic. Let me know what you did. Let me know what was awesome for you. Let me know what was a miss as well. So I don't talk about those as much, but there were some of those, but we're not doing that this video. So have a great freaking day. Thanks for subscribing, tuning in, and taking the time to watch. I appreciate it. Peace out. See you around. I know I'm an acquired taste, aren't I? Ooh, yeah.